Is everybody ready? All right, everybody, here we are. Welcome to our regular Board of Directors meeting for May 17th. Item 1, we're going to take just as sort of housekeeping right at the beginning. Item 10 on our agenda will come off of our agenda and come back on at a future board meeting. So, with that said, item 1 on the agenda, board announcements. Anybody have anything? Seeing none. Public open time for items not on our agenda. Concord, do you have any public who would like to speak? Okay, seeing none. We don't have anybody here. Next is report from our Chief Executive Officer. Dawn, good evening.
Good evening. I have a few items to report this evening. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to start off with a big welcome to our Chief Executive Officer, who is right here to my right. We have.
You said executive.
Did I just say that? Sorry. No, I'm not leaving. Chief Operating Officer, COO. And Vicken joins us from many years of experience, actually. I can't just say one place. I want to tell you a little bit about Vicken because we've been looking for someone to fill this role for quite some time, and we're really excited to have him on board. Vicken's career in the energy industry spans over 30 years, and most recently, he was at the Imperial Irrigation District, where he completed a 20-megawatt state-of-the-art battery storage system with a black start capability that improves on reliability, so that's really exciting. He also completed negotiations to build a 30-megawatt solar facility that's 100% of its output is fully allocated to all of the 16,000 low-income customers of Imperial Irrigation District. So he's bringing a lot of relevant experience on multiple fronts, which is exciting. He also spent a lot of his career at the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, otherwise known as SMUD, where he carved out from PG&E 4,650 megawatt load into a new balancing authority that merged together the operations of quite a few areas: SMUD, City of Roseville, City of Redding, City of Shasta Lake, Napa, and others in Northern California. And this provided around $150 million a year savings. So another kind of feather in the cap there, very exciting. He also spent some time at the Northern California Power Agency, where he participated in the creation and full implementation of metered subsystems within CAISO. And also ran the first congestion management auction at CAISO. Anyway, I could go on and on, but he's had a lot of very relevant experience and has already provided a lot of value in meeting with our staff over the last week. And I just wanted you all to provide a warm welcome to Vicken. So thanks for being here, Vicken. The next item is I wanted to let folks know that the new Concord office, where many of us are this evening, is now fully operational. I wanted to acknowledge the efforts of our operations team in getting this office space up and running and making the transition successful. Let us know if there's anything we can do to make the board meeting experience flow any better for you all as far as audio and visual. We'll be fine-tuning as we go. This is literally the first time that we've had a board meeting with this Concord location being used, and the cameras and the audio are all new, so this is a trial run. Let us know if you notice anything that you think we can do to make things work better. And then I have two really exciting updates. I wanted to let folks know that the CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, approved MCE's application to become a scheduling coordinator. So this is really exciting. We've been working on this since January, and we're now at the point in the process where we're going to begin preparing for that transition. It'll take us a few months to prepare for that, but it'll create a new relationship with CAISO that we think is really beneficial and represents the growth of MCE into this new role. We'll be the first CCA in the state that's taking on this role, and we're hoping that others will be able to follow shortly after.
What does that mean for us? I don't quite know what that is, what a scheduling coordinator is.
Sure, I'm happy to comment on that briefly. So MCE works with a vendor, and since we began serving customers in 2010, we've been working with a third party to serve as our scheduling coordinator. And what that means is we have to schedule our generation. All the power supply that we have under contract needs to be scheduled into the CAISO on a daily basis. And we have to provide a load shape showing, and a generation shape showing how much energy we will be putting onto the grid, how much we'll be taking off of the grid. So in addition to scheduling our generation, we also schedule our load. And then we are responsible for settling that load and paying any imbalance charges depending on how the schedule lines up with the actuals. So our interface with CAISO has been through a third party up until this point, but we will take over the role of being the primary entity responsible for scheduling with CAISO, but we will continue to use a third party to work under our direction in performing those duties initially. There may be a point in the future where we actually take on all of the scheduling functions in-house, but we're not planning to do that anytime in the near term. The next item I wanted to report on briefly, in case you haven't seen the news via email, MCE has achieved a credit rating. So we're really excited about this. It has been a long time coming. We've been working on this for many, many years, and we're really pleased with the positive outcome and the positive rating. Big thanks go to our board for prudently managing our operations and our funds. Also, big thanks go to our finance manager, David McNeil, our procurement and operations team, and our representatives from PEA. We've got John, Kirby, and Sam from PEA here with us tonight. Big thanks to all of those folks for getting us to this point. We're the first CCA in the state to receive a credit rating, and we expect this will help pave the way for other CCAs to follow and also help us in our procurement efforts to achieve even better pricing and a more competitive environment when we're going out to procure. Yep.
If I could ask, how many, I saw the credit rating, bunch of letters and what, capital B, little a's. Just to satisfy my curiosity, how many steps down is that from, say, double A, for example? Or double A?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Don't worry about triple A. I'll settle for double A.
Yeah.
So how many steps down are we?
Yeah. David, I think you're in the San Rafael office. Do you want to respond to that question?
It's approximately from double A. I'm not sure that Moody's uses
Lift
it.
your microphone up a little bit.
I'm not
Or
sure that-
whatever the relevant comparable nomenclature is.
How about this? We're one notch below PG&E Corporation.
That wasn't my question. If you don't know the answer, that's fine. I'm just curious.
I don't, and I'm happy to send around the rating scales of Standard & Poor's and Moody's as a follow-up, so you can see what the rating scale is and where we
Maybe you
fit in.
could talk about what that rating means to you in terms of investment grade, though, just as a summary.
Well, I would just echo Dawn's remarks. They really, it really will enable us to lower our costs for procurement. It will enable us to secure sources of supply that were not previously available to us.
Right. It's a positive investment grade rating. It's not. It's a good rating.
It's a very good rating outcome.
Yeah.
It's also a few steps up from some of the counterparties that we transact with, which is encouraging.
And the question I had was, I think I heard the rating is from Standard & Poor's compared to the other rating services. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then the other question is, how often will the rating be reviewed?
Well, ratings are not reviewed at a fixed point in time, so they're always watching is how it works, and when circumstances change, then they will make an assessment. Typically, they will inform the market that they're considering a change in the rating, so you get some advance notice that that's going to happen, and as a result of their investigation, they may change the rating or they may not.
My experience is we could also ask them to review us again if we think circumstances have changed that warrant a change in our rating. So I'm not sure we should simply be passive.
I think that's a very good thought, and I will certainly be diligent in following up with Moody's to improve our credit rating.
David, it looks like The very lowest of investment grade is BAA3, and we are BAA2, which is one notch better
That's
than
correct.
the very bare minimum. So we didn't just hit the bare minimum, we made it a little bit higher.
And there's 10 ratings in the investment grade.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. The last item I wanted to bring people up to date on is that we have a few CCAs around California that are gearing up to launch in June 2018. It's going to be the kind of the biggest CCA month I think that we've seen thus far, including Valley Clean Energy, which includes Davis and Yolo County, East Bay Community Energy, Solana Beach down in San Diego County. This will be the first CCA in the San Diego gas and electric region, and then King City, which is in the Monterey Valley area. Due to the resolution at the CPUC attempting to limit CCA startup, we do have a couple of CCAs that have withdrawn their 2018 startup implementation plan and will be deferring to a following year, and that includes Riverside and the Western Riverside Council of Governments. So that's just a quick update on what's happening in other parts of the state. And then lastly, I wanted to let folks know that we are likely to not be holding a June board meeting, but we'll be following up to confirm that in the next week or two.
All right, great. Thanks, John. Some folks here think that I promised that we wouldn't have a meeting in June, so we may have to really talk about that. All right, so next on our agenda is the consent calendar. We have 4 items. Is there any item that anyone has any questions or would like any discussion about? Can I have a motion?
Yeah, I did. And I'd ask Dawn a question. When we received a copy of the Joint Powers Agreement, in section 6.1, it said that the fiscal year was July 1 through June 30. And then the following sentence says, fiscal year may be changed by board resolution. I'd like to recommend that when you distribute the JPA in the future, that either parenthetically or something else behind it, you said, that the fiscal year was changed by board resolution number on such a date, and then say what the new fiscal year is, so that someone reading the JPA will at least know that the JPA has been changed by board resolution.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Beth Kelly wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, this is Beth Kelly, General Counsel. And I had received the email prior about the resolution, which we did pass a resolution at that time in 2010. And I've already asked my team to make that revision. So next time you see it, it will have that change.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it generated a whole bunch of questions in my mind, and when I read the JPA and didn't see that our fiscal year matched up with the JPA.
Super. All right, any other questions or comments on any item on consent?
I'll move consent items C1 through C4.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions on anything such as the meeting minutes? All right, hearing none.
Counselor Danville will abstain.
Thank you. Any other abstentions? Sashi, okay, all right.
In the minutes, yeah.
All right, anyone else? Okey-dokey. Great, all right, so moving on to item 5 on our agenda, which is the MCE Napa County Fire Rebuild Program. Who's going to be introducing this item?
We're going to hear from Alice Stover on this item, who, while she's coming up, I'm going to make an impromptu announcement that Alice is taking on the Director of Customer Programs role that Becky Menton vacated. So we're really excited to have Alice stepping up to take on this new role, and she's going to tell us about an exciting program that we have underway for some of our fire-affected communities. Can we get a mic over toward, oh, very good.
Is this mic on? Thank you. Is this on now? Can people hear me?
No.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I'd like to give a little update on our Advanced Energy Rebuild Napa program. So this is a program that we are launching this summer in Napa to help with the rebuild after the wildfires of October 2017. So this program is a partnership between MCE, the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, or BayREN, and PG&E. The program will offer incentives for the efficient rebuild of homes that were red tagged in the fire. And then on top of that, we're also adding in incentives for electrification measures and solar plus storage. So sort of the base of this program is PG&E's new construction program, and that's the program that offers the energy efficiency rebates. On top of that, we've received a $1 million grant through BACMUD to offer electrification incentives. So for things like heat pumps, we're exploring also adding in induction cook stoves, and then also solar plus storage. So the idea here is really to allow people to rebuild with an entirely electric home.
Don't gesture with the hand that holds the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll gesture with my other hand. So MCE has received a $1 million grant through BayREN for the incentives. Through BACMUD, and we'll be partnering with BayREN to cover the cost of administering those rebates. And then we're also actively exploring other partnerships that would allow us to rebate things such as energy efficient or water efficient landscaping, some other non-energy type measures there. So the uptake goal here, there were about 500 homes red tagged in the fire in Napa. We're hoping for about a 15% participation rate. If you do the math, that doesn't really add up to the $1 million rebate level. So we're also trying to figure out ways to boost the rebate. For example, providing a kicker for care eligible homes or homes that are on care, or adding in other measures like potentially outlets for homes that are not necessarily going all electric now, but would set them up if they wanted to transition to a heat pump in the future. Some benefits of this program, obviously GHG emissions reductions through the electrification measures, assisting one of our member communities in rebuilding after a natural disaster. And then it's also an opportunity for us to test some ideas around single-family new construction program design in anticipation of some funding through the CPUC for our energy efficiency programs. And so, like I said, this program will launch this summer and should be wrapping up in December of 2020. And happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's a wonderful program to be involved with. I think it's really great. Brad, did you want to say something about your home county?
Yes, I'm very excited about this. I think it's visionary in that we have 650 houses that were burned in the fire, and if we're able to rebuild those in more electrically efficient manners and get them to be more fully electric, we've really lowered the carbon footprint for Napa County and the whole region. My understanding is that this is also going to be able to be used for electric vehicle recharging.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we're exploring with the extra money in the grant. So yeah, I think that is a possibility.
Good. Thank you. I'm just thrilled by it.
Fantastic. Any other comments or questions? Any other comments or questions for Alice? Okay. All right, this is discussion item only, correct, Alice? You don't need us to decide anything for you, right?
Correct. Just discussion.
Okay. Great, thank you. Go off and do a great job there getting everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, so next on our agenda is the MCE Greenhouse Gas Reporting and Power Supply Statistics presentation.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Kirby Dussel with Pacific Energy Advisors, and I feel like every year when I get to do this presentation, I draw the long straw because this is it's fun information to compile. I think it's more enjoyable still to communicate, and it really speaks to, really validates the good work that this organization's doing. So we're going to be talking tonight, as the agenda item suggests, about our power content in 2017. We're going to go over kind of what made up in terms of the different percentages of our portfolio, the various fuel sources that we used, and the greenhouse gas emission factors that resulted from that. But before we dive into the statistics, boy, it's weird seeing yourself on a big screen like that. Before we get into that, I wanted to spend just a brief moment, and for those that were involved in the technical committee discussion, I apologize because a lot of this will be redundant, but I wanted to go over some of the key drivers of power supply statistics, just so we're all aware that these are really dynamic. And over the course of the year, it's incredibly difficult, even when you have an integrated resource plan that has very clearly articulated goals and objectives framed as percentages for different types of energy products that will be used to serve your customers' energy requirements. It's really difficult to hit those marks, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But that top line, the starting point in terms of the objectives really is the integrated resource plan, and you all are familiar with that document. You review it, you adopt it every year. But beyond that, we've got these complexities that exist, and we've got things like retail sales. We have forecasts of those sales, but actual sales can certainly differ, and they always do, from the forecast. Weather, various other things, customers coming and going, all of those different factors can change how it is that actual and forecasted data compare. The same can be said about our supply portfolio. We've got a lot of intermittent renewable resources. Wind doesn't blow all the time when you expect it to. Clouds go over solar arrays, things like that. So we have projections of what it is that we feel like we're going to receive in terms of the output from those various renewable facilities, but it doesn't always come to fruition the way we think it will. Beyond that, we have complexities like variable hydrologic conditions not only within California, but really throughout the western United States. And we'll talk a little bit more in the presentation about where it is that we buy our power. But rainfall in California certainly varies from year to year, widely varies, as it does throughout the western region.
Kirby, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know that the person who controls your slide deck is in San Rafael. So when you're ready to go to the next slide, you can just make a
Okay,
comment
perfect.
about
So we can just go ahead and go to the next slide, and then I'll let you know from there when to advance. So that first content-related slide. Perfect. So we're about midway through this one right now. One of the big kind of topics, and it looks like you're going to hear a little bit more about this tonight later on in the agenda, is just the nature of power accounting protocols and the fact that we're right in the midst of, at the moment, of implementing some changes that will be result in some kind of fundamental differences in the way that power portfolios are accounted for going forward. You're familiar with Assembly Bill 1110 and the fact that that will result in the inclusion of retail greenhouse gas emission factors on customer power content labels every year. And that process will also result in various other changes. So this is something that affects power resource accounting as well. Beyond that, we have kind of a bit of a comparative metric as well in the form of what it is that the neighboring utility is doing, PG&E. And of course, they have a very dynamic supply portfolio of their own, which is largely affected by the formation of community choice aggregation programs within their service territory. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how the addition of CCAs within Northern California really has the effect of kind of quote-unquote cleaning PG&E's supply portfolio, and of course, how it is that MCE compares. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So from a planning and procurement perspective, we really kind of go through, at this organization, through a two-phase process. And the first phase is focused on securing the necessary clean energy commitments that we need to have in order to hit our goals and objectives articulated in the integrated resource plan. We have solicitations that we administer. We have an open season process that you've probably heard about, various other procurement exercises that we undertake throughout the year to hit those marks. And then there's a second pass that we also make that's more focused on price risk mitigation. Clearly, electric utility industry has a lot of volatility in terms of market prices, and so we want to make sure that from a budgetary perspective and ultimately a customer rate perspective, we're providing some insulation and predictability so that we don't need to constantly reset rates. And so that second pass in the planning process is intended to secure contracts that will provide that price protection to our customers. So kind of think of things two different ways there. And then throughout the year, in addition to keeping our eyes on that integrated resource plan target for both renewable energy and then overall carbon-free energy content, we're doing some balancing exercises along the way. We're constantly monitoring our actual energy sales relative to our expectations, and to the extent that there needs to be some rebalancing over the course of the year, those exercises are undertaken. Beyond that, we'll also look from time to time to take advantage of some opportunistic clean energy procurement opportunities. So to the extent that we can essentially buy clean energy at or very close to the same price as conventional power, we might choose to take advantage of that as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that along the way. And then some of the commitments that we make contractually are again, specifically designed to provide some price insulation. So we actually, through those exercises, kind of, we buy the power and then we sell it back into the market. And that process does provide price protection for our customers and rate stability as a result of that process. So that's kind of a little bit of a snapshot there of the general planning and procurement exercise that's undertaken by the organization, which again contributes to the statistics that we'll be sharing tonight. If we could go on to the next slide. So really briefly here, this is the retail sales trajectory of MCE, kind of going back to the beginning of time, if you will. So May 7th, 2010, that's when the organization commenced serving customers, and it only served a very small subset of its customers at that particular point in time. And you can see that there has been rapid and significant growth over time. And the reason I kind of bring your attention to that is because that's a stress on all of the different clean energy objectives that you have. To the extent that sales go up, of course, that necessitates additional clean energy purchases. And to the extent that your retail sales increase substantially, then of course, the clean energy commitments also have to increase substantially, and all of that within a very dynamic marketplace. So just something to remind you of there. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of 2017. You can see the left-hand column, the breakout of the different retail service options that are available to MCE customers, starting at the top with light green, deep green in the middle, and then our newest retail service offering, Local Soul, at the bottom. Moving over to the next column, you can see the proportion of retail sales that fall within each one of those service categories. And each one of these, you can see also, are broken out by residential and non-residential customers. So basically, non-residential being primarily made up of the commercial, industrial, and agricultural accounts. And then moving over to that third column, you can see retail sales expressed in megawatt hours. So in 2017, there were a total of 2.8 million megawatt hours sold to MCE customers. And then the rightmost column is a snapshot of MCE's customer base as of December 31st, 2017. So these are enrolled accounts as of that date, and you can see how they shake out amongst the different service options. Clearly, the vast majority of MCE's sales occur for the default service option, light green, but over time, and really in spite of significant growth, there's still some ground that's being gained with deep green sales as well, which I think is really good news. Peak demand, or the moment at which energy was used most intensively during 2017, occurred on September 1st. At 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and that was almost 643 megawatts. So pretty good chunk of usage there at one particular point in time. And then year over year, we experienced a 32% increase in retail sales relative to 2016. So again, pretty significant growth. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. So while some of the names here might be a little hard to read, that's really not the point necessarily of this pie chart. What is the point is indicating to you that for our electric energy products, so again, just the electric energy, not the resource adequacy capacity or anything else, just the electric energy products, we did business with 24 unique suppliers. So that's not 24 contracts. There are many more contracts than that, but 24 unique suppliers. And you can see them here kind of around the wheel, so to speak, and the different proportions of MCE supply that are comprised by each one of these suppliers. And if you reflect back to 2016, I think that number was about 17 suppliers, 16 or 17. So as the business grows, as sales increase, our supplier portfolio, if you will, continues to diversify. So we're not doing business with just one or two different organizations, but many organizations. And you can see here representation from our relatively small providers, which are our feed-in tariff projects located throughout MCE's service territory. You'll see kind of less than 1% or 1% indicated for some of those projects because they are relatively small, all of them 1 megawatt or less. And then you can see some relatively large chunks here for some of our carbon-free and renewable suppliers. And so that's really all that I wanted to convey with that one. If we can move on to the next slide. So geographically speaking, this is where our power comes from. And the good news, I think, from this slide is that an increasing amount of our power is coming from California-based resources, which I think is great news. In addition to that, our unspecified power sources, so this is basically purchases made from the market at large, where we don't have a direct relationship with a specific generator, have fallen considerably, so down to just 6% in 2017, and that's down from 19% in 2016. So as we go out and we target transactions with specific generators, most of which are producing clean energy in various forms, so either hydroelectricity or RPS-eligible renewable energy, that unspecified percentage continues to go down. Which leads us to our draft power content label on the next slide. Now, this is a general representation of the format that will be communicated to customers later in the year. There are a few differences that we'll incorporate when that mailer goes out, but for the time being, we're really focusing on MCE here. And you can see down the left-hand column the identification of various fuel sources that comprise MCE's supply portfolio. These are fuel sources that are identified categorically within the state's Power Source Disclosure Program regulations. So we wanted to call them all out, even though we don't buy power from certain of these technology types, in particular coal and nuclear power. But in that second to left column, you'll see MCE's aggregate supply portfolio. So this is the sum of the parts, light green, deep green, and local soul. And starting at the top, you'll notice that a very significant percentage of our supply portfolio is comprised of renewable energy, 62%, and you can see how that breaks out amongst the different technologies that contribute to that percentage. Large hydroelectricity, so these are regionally located and in some cases in-state hydroelectric generators that contributed to MCE's resource mix. They made up 25% of the supply portfolio in 2017. We did also do a natural gas deal. So this is a deal with an electric generator that uses natural gas to produce electric power. And the reason for this, one, cost. It was a relatively low-cost transaction. Two, the emission factor associated with this large, efficient natural gas generator is considerably lower than the emission factor ascribed to system power. So there is an environmental benefit here as well. And this is a facility owned by Calpine here.
Are those turbine generators run by natural gas?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so these are combined cycle, so large, multiple hundreds of megawatt facilities that tend to run pretty much all the time. So they provide, base load power to not only MCE, but many other buyers. We're just a small subset of the off-takers from this particular facility, the Metcalf Energy Center. And then at the bottom, this is kind of a new category for us this year, the other category. And the good news is we know what that is. The bad news is we won't be able to categorize this as we'd like to until AB 1110 goes into effect beginning in 2019. For the time being, this other category is represented by asset controlling suppliers. And what that means is the California Air Resources Board has certified emission factors associated with 3 different owners of very kind of broad and diverse supply portfolios that are generally located in the Pacific Northwest. So entities like Bonneville Power Administration, PowerX, and Tacoma Power all have certified emission factors by the California Air Resources Board. And to the extent that you buy power from one of those entities, you are assigned the emission factor associated with their portfolio at large, which is predominantly comprised of hydroelectricity, but also includes small amounts of renewable resources and also natural gas. And so we did receive deliveries from 2 of the 3 different asset controlling suppliers, and it made up a relatively small portion of our supply portfolio. But it comes with an emission factor that's about half of what you'd typically find for a geothermal resource. So very, very low, just above 0. And then moving across the table here, you can see the differences between light green and then, of course, our 2 100% renewable options, local soul and deep green. For the time being, deep green, we had a little bit of a transition relative to 2016, where we now are offering a product that's comprised 50% solar, 50% wind for deep green. So 0 emissions across the board for that one. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So some key highlights, and if you're doing the numbers in your head on the last slide, some of this will look familiar to you, but for 2017, MCE significantly exceeded its clean energy targets. I think that's the punchline. The detail behind that is MCE's supply portfolio was 89% GHG free, so it's the highest it's ever been for this organization, and certainly amongst the highest in the state, if not the highest. 62% of our supply was represented by renewable resources, with the vast majority of that being related to bucket 1 renewable generation. So these are resources that are primarily located within the state of California, are directly interconnected to the state of California, or are being scheduled directly into the state of California. So this is the highest value, least restricted form of renewable energy from a compliance perspective. All in all, 59% of our renewable supply was bundled, which is entirely consistent with our integrated resource plan in the sense that the residual renewable energy, approximately 3%, was from the use of unbundled renewable energy certificates. So again, in line exactly with our integrated resource plan. Large hydro was up quite a bit, almost double what it was in 2016. We were able to identify quite a lot of regionally produced hydroelectricity, as well as some California-based supply at very competitive prices, which contributed to that uptick year over year. And then 57% of that supply, as I mentioned on one of the previous pie charts, was from California-based sources. And then as a subset of that, 73% of our renewable supply was from California-based sources. So I think that's also very good news. In terms of emission factors, we're looking at a total portfolio emission factor for 2017 of 109 pounds of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour, which is a 61% reduction relative to 2016. Again, I'm suspecting that's amongst the lowest emission factor, amongst the lowest in the state. Next slide, please. So just kind of a reminder of the history here, what's happened looking back over the last several years. You'll see MCE's renewable energy commitments have certainly gone up. The stacked bar chart at the bottom portion of that, that's our bundled renewable energy supply. The light green or middle section of that stacked bar chart is our unbundled renewable energy supply. And then the top portion, shown as light blue, is our overall, our additional GHG-free supply. So this would be the hydroelectricity that we've talked about so far. And you can see that over time, we've kind of squeezed out and down our use of unbundled renewable energy certificates while focusing more on bundled renewable energy products, and also kind of keep moving that overall carbon-free content up, which of course forces our emission factor down. And that's the line there at the top. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So how do we compare with the other local utility, PG&E? This is a snapshot over the last 5 years. The bar charts at the bottom there compare our renewable energy content, respectively. And then the lines at the top, those compare our overall greenhouse gas free portfolio compositions. And you can see that across the board, MCE is very significantly above PG&E when it comes to renewable energy procurement, and also is faring rather well on a GHG-free content as well. And in particular, 2017 looks to be, about the highest, amongst the highest in the state in terms of GHG-free content. I think I mentioned, last year, for some of you that are new, you weren't around when the presentation was given, but in 2016, very good hydro year for PG&E. A lot of customers lost to CCA service alternatives, and as a result, there was a very, very tight comparison in terms of the GHG-free content. But I think through the integrated resource planning process and some opportunistic purchases that were made, we've again separated ourselves there. And I think it's worth noting, and Director Sears, hopefully you observed the change here that needed to be made there at the bottom of the presentation, but we've done all this without procuring nuclear energy, which made up about 24% of PG&E's supply in 2016, and we expect that number will probably go up in 2017. So a lot of contribution from nuclear energy in PG&E's supply portfolio, where that's not at all the case with MCE. And you can see the data sources at the bottom here too. Next slide, please. So this is the emission factor comparison, looking at PG&E's portfolio emission factor relative to light green over the last several years. And you can see again that in 2016, things were pretty close, with PG&E benefiting from that very strong hydro year and some lost sales. But then in 2017, of course, this is projected for PG&E, but we were pretty close in our projections for 2016, so I expect we'll be really close to getting the number right here as well, but we're about 40% below PG&E in 2017, so again, a really favorable comparison for MCE customers. Next slide, please. Now here's kind of the interesting thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So CCA has obviously grown in popularity. There's been wide expansion of existing programs and certainly the formation of new programs, many of those occurring within Northern California. And so this chart here, we've got stacked bars going back to 2010, where MCE was the first and only operating community choice aggregation program in the state. And of course, that's changed significantly over time. Now there are several programs operating with several more imminent in terms of their operations, and then others to come in the future, where now we're looking at about 60% of PG&E's historical retail sales transitioning out to CCA providers by 2020. So this is a pretty radical shift in terms of who's providing the generation service to customers in Northern California. And even though it's hard to read, you can see all the different programs identified here, and it's worth noting that the informational sources for all of this data were the CPUC certified implementation plans of each one of these programs, or our direct knowledge of their retail sales based on working with different programs like MCE. So there's a lot of credibility in the data, and in fact, it might be a little bit conservative depending on how things pan out. So PG&E's sales are declining as CCAs ramp up. And what does that mean in terms of their clean energy portfolio? So let's go to the next slide. Well, the line chart here is indicating PG&E's emission factor over time. And the bar chart is indicating retail sales to CCAs. So you can see as the bar charts go up, meaning CCA sales go up, PG&E's emission factor has gone down. And we're really expecting that over the next few years, PG&E's carbon-free content will likely exceed 90% as a result primarily of these CCA programs forming within their service territory, because they've got a resource fleet that will stay substantially unaltered even with these CCA programs forming and customers departing. And in particular, the nuclear resource base that I mentioned, the hydroelectric fleet that they have, and many of their renewable contracts will remain in place and will continue to produce power regardless of whether or not CCAs exist. Now, PG&E has been going through the process of selling off certain of its renewable energy quantities to various buyers, including CCAs. However, we feel like this trend is pretty accurate foreshadowing in terms of where their portfolio will be going. And we wanted to make you aware of that because I think it plays into the broader planning discussion for this organization and where it is that we set our targets and how it is that we really differentiate ourselves moving forward in time. So if we could move on to the next slide. So this is really the last slide I've got for you tonight, and it's a reminder of our integrated resource plan procurement targets, both for renewable energy and carbon-free energy. They're at the top. It's worth noting that we've surpassed our targets in recent years, and this has really been due to some opportunistic purchases for greenhouse gas-free hydroelectricity that has been cost competitive with conventional power alternatives. But not too far down the road here, we're going to have some changes that will really they'll alter the way that organizations like MCE and many other CCAs view renewable energy products. And those changes will directly result from the implementation of Assembly Bill 1110 and the manner in which certain renewable energy products are accounted for in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and in particular, Bucket 2 and Bucket 3 products. So Bucket 2 meaning predominantly out-of-state generators that are importing power into the state of California, and Bucket 3 meaning unbundled renewable energy certificates will soon be attributed greenhouse gas emissions roughly equivalent to system power, so a natural gas generator. And you can avoid some of that with Bucket 2 products by creatively addressing how it is that power is delivered into California. But I think for many buyers of Bucket 2 products, you will wind up with some significant greenhouse gas emissions impacts for a power product that was historically treated as GHG free. So I guess, in terms of the discussion tonight and items that I wanted you to be thinking about from a planning perspective, I think what I would like to leave you with is, how do we and how should we consider our targets that we've set and potentially adapt those targets going forward so that we can effectively differentiate ourselves within this ever-changing Northern California electric utility landscape. So that's really all I had for you. I think it was a great year in 2017 for MCE, just some phenomenal metrics that came out of this process, and it was really fun to compile the statistics. And in about 2 weeks' time, we'll be submitting a power source disclosure report to the California Energy Commission that conveys a lot of this information to the regulator and will eventually be the basis for the power content label that we send out to our customers later in the year.
I had a question. As our portfolio gets less and less greenhouse gas and more renewable, what does that do to our dark green versus light green? Our light green starts to look a whole lot like are dark green? And how do we differentiate those products and price those products?
Yeah, great question. And I think I've got some comments that I'll offer, and if Don or John or anybody else have some as well, I'd invite them to weigh in too. But one of the things that we've certainly focused on in recent years with Deep Green and really trying to provide value to those customers that have made that commitment is, first and foremost, all of the resources that are supplying Deep Green are located within California. And beyond that, we've made an effort to include, and in particular in 2017, include the exclusive output of certain of our feed-in tariff projects to those Deep Green customers, so they can really have power sources they can, drive by and be near to, so there can be a kind of a closer connection between their commitment to that product and the power sources that are actually serving them. So resource location, and then, of course, those, I guess, highest value, ultra-localized, if you will, feed-in tariff projects.
Yeah, I would just add that I think that the contributions that are made to the local renewable development fund from the Deep Green customers has been really, really valuable to some customers. It's something we talk about a lot when we're doing our public outreach. And the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that we are on a trajectory to, eventually, I think our objective is to get to a 100% renewable product as our default product, but that's going to take quite a few years. And currently, our integrated resource plan has a trajectory of getting to 80% renewable content by 2025. And we'll need to see how the market is looking at that point, but we expect to continue increasing the percentage of renewables until we get to 100. But for now, the Deep Green product is creating a lot of value by helping to get our local projects built, and as Kirby said, by relying on California sources of solar and wind, which is really valuable to a lot of our customers.
And maybe one other thing to add, I think, Don, you touched on something very important there with that local renewable development fund directly contributing to the success of Solar One. And that project having recently come online, I think the 2018 supply portfolio for Deep Green will rely heavily on Solar One, which I think will be a really neat connection between that investment fund and the customers that are benefiting from it. So.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, Greg Lyman, El Cerrito. Kirby, thank you very much for the presentation. And as you noted, certainly in this last slide that you presented, we at 62% renewable, we're already past our 2019 goal, and at 89% GHG free, we're past our 2021 goal. However, our integrated resource plan allows for up to 19% bucket 2, and your final question on this slide is, should we make a change to the integrated resources plan projection? I guess presumably around the bucket 2 discussion. And during our subcommittee meeting, we talked about potentially bringing our 2025 goal forward in anticipation of the potential changes in how bucket 2 are accounted. So I wanted to, point that out so that as potentially as the launching point for discussion, if there is such a discussion tonight, that we are, meeting our goals, our future goals already. However, we're only at 16% bucket 2, and we allow up to 19%, and we may want to, depending on how bucket 2 is accounted for, and that's potentially the next agenda item, we may want to actually put some sort of lower cap on the bucket 2 until we know what the future includes. So that's just a way of starting off potentially the discussion, Kirby, you were asking us to do.
Any other questions or comments for Kirby or answers to that final question? Which I think is really an ongoing conversation and not something we're going to be deciding tonight, but it's good to get it launched. Else? No, I'm not seeing anyone here. Anyone else in Concord with a comment or a question? I'm not hearing anybody. Thank you, Kirby. That was a great presentation. And I think we're going to roll into our next agenda item, which is related, which is our update on AB 1110 proceeding. CC.
Yeah. For the folks in Concord, my name is Cece, and I am the Senior Policy Analyst at MCE. And as alluded earlier, I am going to present on the two ongoing regulatory proceedings that are related to greenhouse gas emissions accounting and help you understand the impact on MCE's procurement and also some other CCAs. So before I dive into the proceedings, I want to provide some background so that we're on the same page. So first of all, background on the existing greenhouse gas emissions accounting practices. So before AB 1110 was passed, there is not a mandated methodology for accounting greenhouse gas emissions associated with retail electricity product in California. And how we've been calculating greenhouse gas emissions of our portfolios is based on existing industry best practices and also the definition of different renewable energy resources provided by the California Renewable Portfolio Standard. The Western Renewable Energy Generation Information System develops and provides the rules for eligible renewable energy participants, the retirement of the renewable energy certificates, and also certifying those renewable energy certificates. And that is consistent with the World Resource Institute's GHG Protocol Scope 2, which directly accounts for retail electricity emissions, which is distinct from source emissions. So all of these programs have several key elements. First of all, renewable energy certificates, the RECs, are generated based on the megawatts of renewable energy that has been generated and put on the grid. And therefore, the zero emissions factor or environmental attribute can only be conveyed by the RECs, and the emissions calculation for renewable energy needs to be based on the RECs held by each retail energy suppliers. And the reason, there are two reasons for this. One is that you can't physically track electrons from renewable energy generation to the customers, so you can only track them contractually. And therefore, this also recognizes different retail energy suppliers' investment in renewable energy. Electricity without RECs is reported as no power or unspecified power or system power, and is assigned system power greenhouse gas emissions factor, which is developed and updated by the California Air Resources Board in California once every 2 years. And then the last key element is that it doesn't matter whether the RECs are bundled with energy or they're unbundled, they are both they receive equal treatment so that they are both zero emissions, emissions free. And, you know, a lot of the best practices used nationally and internationally utilize these key elements, including the Green E certification provided by the Center for Resource Solutions for our product, and also the climate registry. And then just, I'm sure you understand a lot of these terms already, but I just want to go over them, making sure that we're on the same page. California has the Renewable Portfolio Standard. There are 3 different kinds of renewable resources under the RPS. So the first one is Bucket 1 resource, which is in-state or directly delivered the California Independent System Operators balancing grid. There are Bucket 2 resources. They are also known as firm-and-shaped resources, which are not directly delivered to CAISO. And then there are Bucket 3 resources, the unbundled RECs that don't come with energy, where we buy the RECs separately. And in terms of cost, Bucket 1 resources are generally 2 to 3 times more expensive than Bucket 2 resources right now. And Bucket 2 resources are generally around 5 times more expensive than Bucket 3 resources. There are also GHG-free resources that are usually large hydro or nuclear resources. So now the fun part, the regulatory proceedings. The first one I'll go over is the power source disclosure proceeding that's happening at the California Energy Commission. This is the proceeding that's implementing AB 1110. As you may recall, it was passed in 2016 with the purpose to disclose greenhouse gas emissions associated with each electricity product provided by each retailer. So on the right, you can see that's the 2016 power content label of MCE. And once AB 1110 is implemented, you will see an additional column associated with each product and providing the corresponding emissions intensity associated with, for instance, the eligible renewables with coal, so on and so forth. And you would think that based on the best practices elements I've just went over, the eligible renewable category would have 0 emissions. But it won't, because the current staff proposal being contemplated at the Energy Commission would, one, attribute emissions to bucket 2 resources based on the underlying firm and shape power. So if the bucket 2 resource, let's say it's a wind resource, is firm and shaped with system power, then that bucket 2 renewable resource would be attributed system power emissions. If it's firm and shaped with hydropower, then it would receive a GHG-free emissions intensity treatment. The proposal would also discount bucket 3 resources GHG-free attributes. And this means that when you can see on this power content label, let's say we bought 3% of unbundled RECs that came from the solar generator. This would essentially pull that 3% out of the solar, make it a separate footnote, and not count that as energy in our portfolio. So this is confusing for a few reasons. One, it doesn't recognize the investment that MCE or any load-serving entity has made to the renewable energy certificates, the renewable energy resource. And two, it pulls the energy out of the portfolio so that the number doesn't add up to 100% at the end of at the bottom of the label, which is very confusing to customers. So another fun proceeding that's also contemplating a slightly different greenhouse gas emissions calculation methodology is the Integrated Resources Planning proceeding at the California Public Utilities Commission. And the methodology that they're considering is called Clean Net Short. This proposal was first put forth by PG&E and supported by the Utilities Reform Network. This methodology measures greenhouse gas emissions on an hourly basis and discounts the value of excess renewable energy if the energy exceeds the load. So I'll go over this slowly. So if you look at the hour 11 box, during that hour, the resource is generating more electricity than our load needs. So instead of counting the entire generation, recognizing the 0 emissions attributes and also the renewable energy it's generating, it would discount the excess volume. And then conversely, if you look at hour 19, where the load is greater than the generation, then we would be punished by having system power emissions factor associated with the difference between the generation and the load. And this is really problematic because currently we're balancing our load on an annual basis. All the power source disclosure methodologies out there are done on an annual basis. This asks us to do it on an hourly basis, which means that we have to count emissions for 8,760 hours a year, and could really impact how we can procure energy to match our load on an hourly basis. And then furthermore, bucket 2 and bucket 3 resources under this methodology are not counted as GHG-free. So this can really impact CCA's competitiveness against especially PG&E, which has a lot of large hydro resources that are GHG-free and has a lot of stranded bucket 1 resources now that CCAs are departing from PG&E load. So this is very concerning to us. And then if either of these proposals goes through as the way it is right now, this could mean very potential significant cost impact on MCE's customers, but also California ratepayers in general. And over 10 years, conservatively, we can see the projected cost increase of $4 billion for all California ratepayers and $242 million over 10 years for MCE ratepayers. So we're near the end. I'll go over a little bit about what MCE and CalCCA has been doing in these two proceedings. We've participated in both proceedings by submitting comments and reply comments that reflect the existing GHG emissions accounting best practices. We've been meeting actively with commissioners' offices and CPUC and CEC staff actively to try to educate them about these best practices and also the impact on ratepayers. We participated in the CEC's technical roundtable discussion, kind of an informal briefing for the commissioners, along with the publicly owned utilities, Center for Resource Solutions, Sierra Club, the investor-owned utilities, and other consumer advocacy organizations. And we will continue to engage these commissioners and staff closely moving forward. And next step, and also just to give you an idea of how our advocacy has made a difference. On the CEC side, the staff and the commissioner's office were anticipating beginning a formal rulemaking process at the beginning of this year, but we were able to delay that process to allow more education and discussion with the staff. So the staff informed us that it's likely that there's another proposal that will come out later in June. And we're hopeful that because of some of the recent discussions, there could be some changes to the current proposal that could make bucket 2 slightly more favorable. And on the CPUC side, we're also working closely with the staff to educate them on different contracting practices that are different from the IOUs. For instance, they actually didn't know that those serving entities in California actually have bucket 2 resources. And this is because IOUs mostly have bucket 1 contracts. So we'll continue to engage the decision makers and continue to align with other allies. And if you have any other ideas or suggestions, I'm happy to hear them. But hopefully this will inform the discussion about our procurement and about our greenhouse gas emissions target moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, CC. Any questions for CC? Comments? Yeah, Sloan.
Hi, thank you, CC. I think I understand a little bit about why it affects CCAs like us more than it would an IOU because it discounts, for example, in particular, bucket 2. Okay. Why is that unfair, though? In other words, I understand this is going to be harder for us to comply with than it would for the investor-owned utilities, but if the consequence is to, as a public policy, encourage or require more bucket 1, isn't that a goal we're sort of striving towards anyway?
Yeah, and maybe John can comment on this too, but I think from my perspective, we're kind of seeing an unequal playing field. I don't disagree that maybe that's where we want to be headed, but the market reality is that the CCAs are launching, they would be forced to buy more expensive bucket one resources and not having the flexibility to build out their portfolio with cheaper bucket two resources, whereas the IOUs already have those resources and they don't need to procure anymore. So I think it's kind of an uneven playing field right now for CCA.
The thing I would add to that, to the great comments CC just made, is just also what we're seeing currently is that the IOUs are selling off the supply that they don't want to keep. And so they have a choice in what they retain and what they sell off. And so they are in a position where they can benefit by keeping the resources that happen to help them meeting these new paradigms. And so that's sort of the concern. We have done our procurement based on the existing rules that are in place in the state. And so kind of a midstream shift is really problematic for us, and the new procurement that we're going to need to do going forward is going to be an undertaking that the IOUs aren't subject to because they have so much departing load right now.
Yeah, and I will also add that, thank you, John. I will also add that the IOUs are holding on to a lot of legacy hydro contracts that are large and also GHG free, that they are not selling a lot of those. And a lot of those resources are not available in the market right now, and CCAs can't buy them.
Madam Chair.
Any other questions for CC or comments?
Okay.
Yeah?
This is Dave Trotter
Hey, Dave.
from Moraga. I'm sure I have a conceptual question. The last slide says that AB 1110 will be implemented in 2020 for the 2019 reporting year. I haven't made a close study of the law. How prescriptive is it? Does it dictate an outcome, or does it just simply leave it in the jurisdiction of the PUC, subject to certain standards to try to come up with a proposal? How much leeway does the PUC have here to address the concerns of CCAs like MCE, that this is basically changing the rules in the middle of the game, and you need to treat them fairly in this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. And I think the Energy Commission does have some discretion. I think they will have to implement this greenhouse gas emissions disclosure in 2020 for the reporting year of 2019, but they have some flexibility in terms of maybe they can adopt one methodology that kicks off in 2020, but then adjust the methodology in 2023, for instance, so they could treat resources that were in contract before 2023 differently than the resources that were inked after 2023. So there is some discretion there, but they would have to include greenhouse gas emissions intensity disclosure on the power content label in 2020.
You're suggesting some grandfathering could be urged for. You're suggesting there could be some grandfathering of existing contracts for some period of time. No?
I think that's potentially possible.
Any other comments or questions? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Cece. That's great. All right, moving on to item A, which is our proposed fiscal year 2017-18 operating fund budget amendment. David, good evening.
Good evening. I'm David McNeil, Finance Manager at MCE. Can you hear me okay in Concord?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine, David. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm here to present a budget amendment for the year that's passed. And in order to, before I go into the details of the proposed budget amendment, I wanted to provide the board with an update on, a financial update on fiscal 2017, 2018, which ended March 31st of this year. So the highlights are that we were about 4% lower than expected in terms of revenue. And Kirby touched on several of the reasons for that. But basically what is important to understand is that we didn't witness a departure of customers. In fact, our customer count went up over the year, just that the usage of those customers was lower than expected, and that resulted in lower revenues than expected. We also had slightly higher costs of energy, and I'll talk more about that. We had significantly lower operating expenses than we budgeted for, so that offset somewhat the impact of the lower energy revenues. And we're going to finish the year with about a $4.5 million contribution to the net position. That's about 60% of target, so it's below target. But I want to emphasize to the board that it still represents a good financial result for MCE, and that we maintain ourselves as being in a position of financial strength. With that context for the last fiscal year, I'm going to now turn to the budget amendment, and I'm going to point out that the budget that you see here, the proposed budget you see here, is not a forecast. What I'm doing here is proposing authorization to do a few things specifically. And those are to increase our cost of energy by about 1.8 million. And this includes a fairly significant contingency. I don't expect it to be this high, but I want to make sure that we have budget availability when the numbers finally crystallize. Let me just take a moment and point out that even at this point of the year, we're still operating on estimates provided to us by the CAISO. So our actual energy costs have not been finalized. We expect to close the books later in June. The other thing that we're proposing is to add a revenue line item and actually distinguish between retail and wholesale sales. And Kirby also in his remarks mentioned the idea of rebalancing, and that's exactly what that relates to the need for this wholesale sale budget line item. So in the past year, MCE exercised an option to acquire PCC1 resources under an existing contract at significantly below market prices. And we did that because we weren't sure how we were going to finish the year in terms of load. Again, there's a lot of estimating going on, and we wanted the assurance that we were going to have those bucket 1 resources there if we needed them. By the time we got to September, we realized that we're going to have a little bit of an excess, and it made sense to sell those, and that's what we did. So what you see here is the budget authorization for that $2.5 million sale, and the cost of those resources, which were sort of additional resources, are included in the cost of energy. Some of the reductions that you see in operating expenses here are just, I think, signaling to the board that we had more budget there than we actually are going to need. And in fact, we're lower considerably on each one of these line items. And scrolling even further down to the capital outlay section, that'll be down the line, row 50, roughly. Sorry, it doesn't go down to 50. Capital outlay is 31. You'll see that I've reduced the budget allocation for capital outlay, and that's because the Concord office was slightly delayed, and so some of those expenses have been pushed into the current fiscal year. And in addition, the parking lot project has been delayed, and so those expenses, capital expenses, again, are going to be pushed into the current year. That concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, David. Any questions? Yeah, Sashi.
David, this slightly lower net position, is that going to change our contribution to reserves?
The contribution to reserves is expected to be about 4.5 million for this current year. So that's a little lower than what we had budgeted, a little lower than what we expected, but still a positive result.
Okay, and what percentage funded would that be?
What percentage?
What percentage funded would that be? I think we'd ended, last time it was like 76%, something like that.
I would have to double check those numbers.
Is it pretty close, or?
Close to what?
To the amount funded, the percent funded?
We set a target percent.
Well, in years past, we've set a target of about 4% of contribution to the reserves, 4% of revenues. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to.
I mean, what percentage
Of our
towards
reserve
the
target?
reserve target, yeah, what is met?
That's a great question. I don't have that number in front of me. So if I can get back to you on that, it would be
Okay,
great.
that would be great, thanks. Great.
Any other questions for David or comments from the board?
Don Tatson from Lafayette. So going back to the energy revenue, I understand that, customer demand was down by about 9 million, and so we sold some wholesale. Of the actual energy, did we sell all that the customers didn't demand on the wholesale market, or did some just essentially disappear?
Do we have John in the room?
Is John DeLacy there?
I'm here. So, okay. So yeah, let me get a little bit closer. Is that better? So the wholesale sales that were reflected, that 2.5 million roughly, were specifically renewable energy that, we had excess and remarketed that. And then, in terms of overall energy, when our total retail sales are lower than expected, first of all, we don't have 100% of our expected sales under contract ahead of time. We intentionally leave a little bit open, somewhere in the generally less than 10%, but we do leave a little bit open, which those sales ultimately are just purchased or basically purchased in the CAISO spot market. So the fact that our sales are down, it did free up some renewables, which we sold off, but it just meant we bought less in the spot market.
Then in that case, what again drove the overall cost of energy increase of 1.8 million? If we're buying less.
Yeah, and so what we are seeing is just increasing power prices in the CAISO market. So, the fact that not all of our power is under contract, that additional energy that we had to buy over the year was at higher prices than basically what was expected, as well as what we've seen historically. So it's interesting, in the energy market, we're continuing to see declining costs for renewable energy projects, particularly solar, continue to come down in price. But we are seeing conventional energy prices, prices in the CAISO market start to increase. And so that's what we experienced this year, just higher prevailing market prices. And so even though our volume was down, our costs were actually a little bit higher than budgeted.
Any other questions for John or David? Or comments from the board? Ray, yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, our fiscal year ended in March 31st of this year. I'm a little bit, I don't know whether it's perplexed or should I be concerned or what the operative word is, to make budget amendments 2 months, 3 months after you've closed not closed the books, I understand, but the financial year's ended. I realize that we've got this estimating issue. I realize that things are moving around, but in the end, the budget is the budget, and actuals against budget, you do a variance analysis. So why are we modifying the budget 2 months after the year's ending? That's a question I'm trying to understand.
Sure. I can take a crack at that, and John and Don, feel free to weigh in. I think that from my perspective, the visibility into the cost of energy number did not really emerge until we got the February results in late March, and that's where it became clear that we were going to perhaps be over. There was a thought to making the presentation in April. For a variety of reasons, we didn't have enough information to do that, and that's kind of how we ended up in May. So I think that we're not in a position where we can all of a sudden, cancel contracts or not deliver, not meet our contractual obligations. So we have to sort of follow through and make these sales, pay for energy that we've purchased. So we're kind of locked in there. And I think that your question really boils down into why didn't we see this sooner, and why didn't we? Or is that's not the question?
No, that's not the question at all. I can understand the issues around lack of visibility, because of the nature of the market. I fully understand that. I'm just asking a technical question. Why are we amending the budget? Why don't you just leave the budget as is and recognize the large variances? I don't understand why you're changing the budget.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll give Don. Sure.
If you don't mind, I just wanted to make one comment, and then I'd love to hear more. I just wanted to, just from a historical perspective, it's pretty common for us to look at the budget towards the end of the fiscal year, and often after the fiscal year, to do a true-up. And this is essentially what we're doing here. Forecasting load is, there's a bit of art and a bit of science, and you often get results that are different than what you see. There have been quite a few years where we actually forecast and ended up with much higher revenue and a lower cost of energy coming in. There have been some years like that where there hasn't been a need to do a true-up because we were simply putting more into reserves. There have also been several years, quite a few years actually, where we've needed to do an amendment just like this. So it's not unusual, and I just wanted to put out that reminder that this is pretty standard for MCE and for other load-serving entities because of the way that energy supply costs and load or usage of customers is really not known until several months after the fact. So it's just a prudent practice to tie things up and do a true-up at the end of the year.
And this is Beth Kelly, General Counsel. I just think it's worth noting that it is not strictly necessary to amend the budget. So essentially, all of the contracts that were entered into, they're based on, the authorization of, is this expected to be within the limit? So if that was the legal side of the question. There.
But actually, David or Beth, I thought the reason that we had to amend a budget after year end, which I agree with Ray, it looks kind of crazy. That's what a budget is supposed to be. Management projects what they're going to do. At the end of the year, you compare actual to what management had forecasted for the year. But I thought the reason we had to do it was because where actual expenses were going to be greater than what we budgeted, management isn't authorized to spend more than had been approved. And so I thought that was the reason, and in fact, the only reason that we're amending this budget after the end of the year. But am I missing something?
I don't think so. That's why I brought it to the board, is because I didn't want to expend funds without budget authorization.
But I would add to that, I hope, I haven't gone back and seen what we've done in prior years, but when we issue a report to the board or others comparing our actual to budget, I hope we're using the original budget, not the budget we created after the fact, which would make it a meaningless comparison.
Right, and I will, following up on that, note that it's a little confusing on this particular document because the first column says fiscal year 2017-18 budget paren amended, which is exactly the same thing that the proposed amended column says. So you have two amended budgets here.
Yeah.
So can you help us explain why they both should be called amended and what our proper comparison is?
Oh, thank you. So the budget the left-hand column of numbers represents the budget that was approved by the board as amended.
Amended when?
In November, and that information appears in the staff report.
Okay.
But thank you for pointing that out. I think that this is the correct way to present the numbers, but I will definitely and project the headings. But I will definitely double check that. The next column over is the proposed change.
Right.
And then the last column over is, second to last column over is what we're proposing.
Sort of a final amended.
Yeah, for you guys to
Right.
approve.
And well, the other reason, in addition to our having expenses different than we had authorization for, I think was because this is the first time you're breaking out energy revenue into retail and wholesale as well. So you're presenting the information in a different way as well. It's helpful. I'm not criticizing it.
So this is Don Testing, and I just wanted to confirm that if the reason to adjust the budget for increases in operating expenses is to make sure we don't spend money which isn't authorized, then if I look at this, it looks like the operating expenses have gone down compared to the prior amended budget. So I guess I'm not sure what the explanation is for the decrease, or why we have to amend it because there's been a decrease, and your forecast is that we'll spend less than what we previously authorized.
Yeah, there's a bit of, it's a very fair question. I did not want to present the board with a budget in which there was a loss, basically. So I needed the additional room in the cost of energy line item, and I made those other adjustments so that we, at least in budget terms, we continue to project a contribution to the net position, and I wouldn't be putting you in a position where I was asking you to authorize a withdrawal from the net position, which would be fundamentally not what I'm doing. So I think that I am actually, I think this more accurately reflects the ask.
Hilarious. So in part, do we have a linguistic challenge? You know, one of the things that we do at the county is we refer to budget adjustments, where we come back in and we true up and we do some of these kinds of changes. I'm just trying to figure out if there's a different language way to capture some of what we're doing that makes it clearer, because having just a series of amended.
I mean, what I'm more used to is a variance analysis. You come up with a budget and you determine actuals and you figure out what your budget is by period, and then you report on how you're doing and you indicate what the variance is. In some cases, you've brought in more revenue. In some cases, you've brought in less. In some cases, your expenses are higher. In some cases, your expenses are lower. But you don't necessarily need a budget adjustment unless you've got rules that say you can't spend more in one category than is authorized. So I guess I'm more used to that than amending the budget.
So I think we laud the goal. We're just struggling with the best
Yeah.
way to express it.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I think that these are good points and good information, and I can take away and reflect on these alternatives, and we could potentially discuss, put it on an agenda item at XCOM and figure out how the board would like to receive these types of requests if and when this type of event arises in the future.
Super. Other questions or comments from folks in Concord or folks in Marin? All right, so I think you need us to actually take some action here. Yes?
I move we approve the proposed operating final budget amendment.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposition?
Chair Sears, sorry to interject. I just wanted to ask if the maker of the motion and the seconder could state their name, and then we're going to do a roll call vote, please. Thank you. And Darlene's going to do the roll for us.
Apis. Bailey.
Yes.
McGallion. Storer, sorry. Butt.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
Cruz. Glover. Green.
Yes.
Harif.
Yes.
Higgins. Benales.
Yes.
Thank you. Lyman.
Yes.
Caskill.
Yes.
McCullough. McEntee.
Yes.
Wellner. Perkins.
Yes.
Russell. Schroeder,
Yes.
Schwartzman,
Yes.
Sears,
Yes?
Toms,
Yes.
Tatson,
Yes.
Trotter,
Aye.
Wagon Connect,
Yes.
Carlston,
Yes.
Withy.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everyone. So next, and thank you for hanging in. I'm mindful that the hour is getting later. But we're going to move on to item 9, which is our rate-setting process overview. John or Kirby, who's taking the lead on this one?
Yep, that would be me. Hi. Good evening, everybody. I'm John DeLessie, and I'll be providing a briefing on MCE's rates. So we can just start with the title slide here. So to start off, I'm going to provide some background on MCE's rate-setting process and some of the key objectives in that process. And then we'll move on to an assessment of MCE's current rates, the revenues that we expect to receive from those rates this fiscal year, and some comparisons to costs under what our customers would pay to PG&E if they were PG&E service customers. So sort of an assessment of the competitiveness of MCE's current rates. So next slide, please. So the normal rate-setting calendar that MCE uses, it was a little bit disrupted this year because what we normally do is we start the process in January. As we're preparing the coming fiscal year budget, the fiscal year, of course, starts in April, and we start pulling together the budget in January. PG&E also releases its rates. Typically, every January 1st, PG&E will change its rates. Also, the PCIA is set on January 1st. So we have a good sense of what we're competing against in regards to rates at that time. And so we'll develop our proposals, work with the committees, the ad hoc rates committee, and to the extent that rate changes are recommended, those would be brought to the board at the February meeting, released publicly. That initiates a public review period. So we make the proposals in February, the board adopts the rates in March, and then they go into effect at the start of the fiscal year in April. So that's the typical cycle. This year, as I said, PG&E was delayed in getting their rates out. They didn't publish them until March, so we had kind of a compressed cycle. We did have discussions with the ad hoc rates committee as well as with the technical committee, and the consensus from those discussions was to not change rates, to keep MCE's rates as they were last year. Just with the one exception being a change to the electric vehicle rates, which this board adopted last month at the last meeting. And so as I understand it, there was a desire to have a more broad rate-setting discussion at this meeting, and so here we are. You can go to the next one, please. So I think it's helpful to review some of the key rate setting objectives that we've used historically and that have been established by MCE. And the first two are probably really the most critical. Revenue sufficiency, in other words, the MCE's rates need to be sufficient to collect the budgeted, cover MCE's budgeted costs as well as provide contribution to reserves, right? So that is sort of one of the paramount objectives of a good rate design. And then the second one is that MCE's rates need to be competitive enough anyway to retain customers. And then we also have additional objectives that we consider, which include a desire to maintain rate stability to the extent that we can, customer understanding, equity among how different types of customers are charged and the differences in rate levels, as well as efficiency. So that kind of, you can think of that as we want to, through our rate structure, send the right price signals to encourage customers to use energy when it's most abundant on the system, when it's the lowest cost for us to procure. So those are some of the objectives that we follow. And then in terms of the rate design process itself, there's really 4 sort of major steps to the process. It really begins with a very detailed forecast of customer usage. And, you know, that really forms the basis of our ability to project revenues at current rates, as well as if we're going to be recommending new rates, revenues at the proposed rates. And then the next step really is comparing the revenues that are projected to what's termed the revenue requirement. You can really just think of that as the budget. And again, that would include the reserve contribution that's targeted. And to the extent then that any changes are appropriate, so if maybe the revenues are less than the revenue requirement, then a rate increase might be called for. Then there's a process of allocating that revenue requirement to the different customer classes. That's called the revenue allocation process. And then the final step in that process is designing the individual rate factors on each of the rate schedules that MCE maintains. So MCE has a very similar rate structure as PG&E, and there are some 50 plus individual rate schedules that customers can receive service under. So the last step is really just designing the specific rates themselves. And go to the next slide, please. So in regards to the customer classifications that are used in rate setting, we follow the same grouping approach as does PG&E. And you know, the nomenclature is basically the groups are defined by the most prevalent rate schedule that customers within the group take service under. So for instance, the residential class, the vast majority of residential customers are served under the basic E1 schedule. So that class is typically referred to as E1. The major classes are shown here. So we have residential, small, medium, and large commercial, industrial, or you can think of those as institutional type accounts, hospitals and water treatment facilities and the like, as well as industrial customers, obviously. And then agricultural and pumping is a class, and then street lighting and traffic control. And those are all different because those customers use energy differently. They use it during different times of day. So they're more or less energy intensive, and they all essentially have different cost of service characteristics. And so they're grouped in these categories of similar customers for that reason. So this is a chart here, a visual that shows at current rates and with our sales projections for this current fiscal year, you know, what the distribution of revenues looks like. And you can see that we have a fairly diverse customer base. There's no single customer segment that is more than, you know, provides the majority of the revenue. So, you know, fairly good distribution to customers along the various end uses. And then jumping to the next slide, this is a little bit more detail here on the customer base. And so, you know, on average this fiscal year, we expect to be serving about 470,000 separate service accounts. So that's obviously a big step up from last year. It represents the recent enrollment of customers in the Contra Costa communities. And our revenues are projected to come in at about $382 million for the fiscal year. And these all tied to the budget that was adopted. The revenues of the $382 million as compared to our expectations of costs are expected to yield a contribution to reserves this fiscal year of about $54 million. So quite a big increase from what we just talked about, what David just talked about. You know, we think we're going to end the last fiscal year with a contribution that year of about $4.5 million. This year we're expecting much, much more net surplus to be generated, and that's largely a result of the increase in sales to the new communities. Yeah, it's really been beneficial, the phased increase in the program size over time, because, you know, as power prices have declined over time and the program has grown, it's really been a benefit to drive down the average cost of power and have lower rates. So, you know, MCE has lower rates today than it did, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, which is, I think, pretty unusual if you think about it. Not many municipal services have declining rates, I think, over time.
And generating a huge, I mean, it's more than 10% of revenue is going to go to reserves. That's very unusual.
Yep. Okay, so now this table here, it reveals a number of things, and so fundamentally it shows what is a comparison of the delivered cost of MCE power to what PG&E would charge at their rates. And by delivered cost of MCE power, what do I mean by that? So MCE has rates for its services, and as I said previously, we expect those rates to generate about $382 million. So that's the first column. The bottom row of the first column is MCE's charges. And then PG&E has charges for the delivery of that power to the customer, so the transmission and distribution charges. That's actually the third column. And we expect those to total about $504 million this year. And then they also charge the PCIA and the franchise fee surcharge. So sometimes we call these exit fees, but those are expected to total about $152 million for this fiscal year. So the bottom line kind of delivered cost to our customers in aggregate would be the sum of those three amounts, a little over $1 billion this fiscal year, which turns out is about $34 million less than those customers would pay if they were served by PG&E. So that's a pretty sizable ratepayer benefit, I think, to the community, $34 million. In percentage terms, relative to the total electric bill, that's about a 3 to 4% savings. It's fairly uniform across the different types of customers that we have. It ranges from 3 to 4%. You know, so if you think about a residential customer, you know, a typical bill might be, let's say, $100 per month. That's about a $3, obviously a $3 per month savings. Some of the very large customers, though, that they might have electric bills of $1 million a month, and so, you know, 3 or 4% on that is some real money. That's, you know, $30,000 to $40,000 every month. So pretty significant, actually, that you know, how much lower MCE's rates are today than our PG&E's. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this was all discussed, as I mentioned, with the ad hoc committee and technical committee, and the recommendation from those discussions was to maintain MCE's rates for this fiscal year, and to make no changes to them other than the EV rate that I mentioned. And the thinking there was that that would best meet MCE's rate-setting objectives. The revenue sufficiency test is checked. The competitiveness test is checked. Stability, you know, is also maintained. So there was good discussion there, but ultimately the consensus was to make no changes. So the MCE's rates, once they go into effect, they remain in effect until changed. So there's really no action that's required to keep them into effect. And so there's really no action being asked tonight. It's really more of an informational item. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
All right. Well, this is Don Tatson. I know it's not one of our criteria that we look at, but with a number of new CCAs forming, how do our rates compare with theirs to the extent you know what they're going to start charging?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it varies. You know, some of the programs I know charge, let's see, the Monterey program, for instance, charges parity, no discount built into the rate structure, but they have an interesting concept where after the close of the year, they're going to rebate some of the savings that they're able to achieve to customers. So that's an interesting idea. Let's see, I would say for just about all of the operating CCAs, you know, they're probably comparable in regards to what they're charging relative to PG&E as MCE is, somewhere in the 3 to 5% lower range. You know, Kirby, do you have any additional kind of comments or data points on how other CCAs rates are comparing to PG&E?
No, I think that pretty much hit it on the head. Although relatively recently, the Pioneer Community Energy Program launched, which serves Placer County, and they had originally targeted a rate kind of comparative advantage of about 3%, and that wound up being closer to 8 or 9% because they took this tact of not updating their rates to maintain that difference. So, you know, that's certainly going to be, I think, at the kind of high end of the scale for sure. But yeah, that's the only other data point I'd offer.
Yeah, I think with the rate changes that PG&E made this year, it put the CCAs in a better competitive position. So some of the programs, I know Silicon Valley started off at 1% below PG&E, but then when PG&E's rates moved up this year, that discount is larger. But I would say on average, you know, kind of in that 3 to 5% range, and some lower and some higher. That seems to be the norm.
Any other questions for John or Kirby? Super, seeing none. Thank you very much. That was helpful. So as I said at the beginning, we're going to defer consideration of item 10 and move on to item 11, which is our communications update. Jamie, hi, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, actually, can I just talk about it?
You're going to need to associate yourself with a microphone.
I will. I'm just waiting for the mouse.
All right.
Is this one on? Thank you. All right, can everyone hear me? All right, thank you so much. Moving on to communications updates. So it's May, and that means that we have officially offered service in the 9 new Contra Costa communities. So that happened last month in April, and we're really excited to give you an update about that enrollment. There were just almost 237,000 eligible accounts, and as John just mentioned, that brings our entire customer service base, the number of customers that we're serving throughout our service area, to 473,000 accounts. So we've grown quite a bit in just 1 month. Our team is responsible for leading the outreach in these communities and letting them know the information that they need in order to make an informed choice about their energy service option. So we create one extensive community outreach plan that was on behalf of all of these communities with feedback from member municipalities and also community members that also reflected the demographics in each of those communities. As part of that plan, we sent out 4 mailed notices, 1 letter in February and March, a trifold notice in March and April, and then postcards for notices 3 and 4 are going out in April, May, and June. We had an extensive advertising campaign that included outdoor advertisements on BART, print advertisements running in local newspapers. We had 40 ads run across this campaign. We did the Comcast advertisements with video commercials, Facebook ads, and then also a bunch of online ads. And this PowerPoint slide is showing the success of the advertisements that we had online. From these digital advertisements, we actually had 17,000 visits to our website in just the last couple of months. So that was a really big uptick, and it was very successful. When we're doing these digital advertisements, we track what's called a click-through rate, and that's the number of times that somebody clicks on your ad, goes to your website, and then actually interacts on your page. And so for all of the different areas, we had higher than average, which is great. We did search ads for Google. Our click-through rate was almost 10% compared to the benchmark average of 4 to 8%. Our Facebook ads did really well, 2.5% click-through rate compared to 0.10. Display ads are just the advertisements that you would see on any various web page that you might be visiting. Again, we are above the benchmark average, and also for the video click-throughs. So the videos are playing on YouTube. We were very busy with a variety of community education initiatives. We created community leader advisory groups. We created 3 different groups, and we hosted 7 different meetings between the 3 groups and had about 8 to 12 participants per meeting. They were made up of community leaders and influential residents who were recommended to be a part of that group through the member municipalities, and they provided feedback on our outreach plans. We also hosted trainings with all of the municipality staff. And in addition to all of the community events that we get invited to present at, like Rotaries and Chambers, we also hosted 7 of our own community events. And I have to say, these were actually the most well-attended events that we have hosted since our launch in Marin in 2010. We are used to seeing maybe 10, 20 on a good day for these types of events, or sometimes even less than 10. And for these 7 different events, we were seeing as many as 100 people attending. There was standing room only, so it was really impressive how engaged those communities were. For 9 of the meetings that we had, so the 7 that we hosted and then 2 of the staff trainings, we did Facebook live streams where we streamed them live on Facebook, had someone from our team online chatting, able to answer questions in real time. And we've had over 8,000 views of those meetings as well. So there's just been a lot of engagement in the 9 communities, which has been really great. We also did a Ringing for Renewables campaign where we identified community organizations like houses of worship, schools, ESL entities, and business associations, and we give them a call, we send them emails, let them know about MCE, and ask them to share information about MCE with their networks. We had several promotional and newsletter collaborations, so big thank you to the City of Concord, Contra Costa County, the El Sobrante Chamber of Commerce, City of Martina, Oakley, San Ramon, and the Sierra Club for including information about this enrollment in their newsletters. We had some really good press in the community. Concord Pioneer, Danville, San Ramon, East Bay Times, East County Today, La Miranda Weekly, the Martina Gazette, and the press all included articles, and I was really pleased with the information that was included in the articles. They were by and large positive and accurate, which is really great, because when there's inaccurate information, it can be really hard to correct. We have participated in 150 meetings and events to date this year, which is really impressive because there's only 137 days in the year so far, just to give you an idea of how much that really is. So we've been really busy, and it's been great because we've been able to be out and about in these 9 new communities, so 83 events in the new member communities, but we've already done 53 events in our other member communities this year, and then a handful outside of our member communities and just throughout the Bay Area. We've had a huge increase in traffic to our website. So this is a chart that shows the number of visits that we had by month. And to give you an idea, last year we had 178,000 visits to our website total. This year, in less than 5 months, we've already had 172,000. So almost the same amount of traffic that we had in a whole year in less than 5 months. Our call center has also been really busy. This chart here shows the number of calls per week, and it also shows, and that's the blue line, and then the orange numbers in the bottom are the number of seconds that it took on average to answer the phone calls in that week. And so at our busiest time, we had more than 2,500 calls in 1 week. And Calpine has done a really good job of managing our call center. This is a huge uptick compared to what we're used to. And even during these busiest times, we've been able to maintain across the board an average call. The typical call was answered within 37 seconds. The industry standard is 45, so we're beating that, which is great. And then this is to the juicy stuff that I'm sure you're interested in. So we have been tracking opt-outs, and in the 9 new communities right now, we're at an 8.2% opt-out rate. This is a really good participation, and it compares favorably to what we see across for our existing communities, which is at 17.5%. If you compare this to where we were at with our last enrollment in 2016 with Walnut Creek, Lafayette, and the 5 Napa cities, they were at 9% at this time. So we're actually trending just a little bit lower. And you can see the breakdown by community here. Oakley is higher compared to the new communities, but we have seen this in the past where one community might be an outlier. I think it was a little bit more, MCE was perceived with a little bit more adversity in that community, and there were some outspoken residents, so we are seeing a slightly higher opt-out rate there. This is a slide that shows the opt-outs by our existing member community. The overall opt-out rate for the existing members is 17.5%. And this is a slide that shows the opt-outs with our new and our existing members. So the new communities are in orange. And with the addition of Contra Costa, it brings our overall opt-out rate to 14%. So that means 86% of our entire customer base is enrolled, is taking MCE service. This slide shows the opt-outs by service start date. So the blue is for Marin when we started in 2010 and 2012. 2013 orange, this is for Richmond right here. 2015 service start. The red, that is for San Pablo, El Cerrito, and unincorporated Napa County. 2016 is sort of this teal color, and those are the 5 cities in Napa, Walnut Creek, and Lafayette, and then the green is the 9 new communities. And you can see that there is a trend with the opt-outs correlating with the service start dates. So the communities that have been enrolled longer tend to have slightly higher opt-out rates. Moving on to deep green, we've had a whole bunch of deep green signups in Contra Costa, and we wanted to show off some of the businesses.
Hey, Jamie, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
We have a question, Councilmember Perkins.
Was the initial rollout, were your rates right at PG&E or slightly above or slightly below? As compared to now where you're 3% below?
Are you talking about for Contra Costa, the 9 new communities?
No, I'm talking about, you know, the blue, those blue bars up there.
Yeah.
You have pretty high opt-out rates by comparison.
We had different, actually, can you put the arrow so we can see the last slide? Thank you. Right, so when we launched service in Marin County, which is the blue, our rates were actually identical to PG&E's at that time. The reason for the significantly higher opt-out rates in Marin is most likely attributed to the PG&E campaign that was happening then. It was during Prop 16, and they dumped $46 million advertising against us, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So we see significantly higher rates in Marin County. Benicia was more similar to what we saw in Oakley, where it was the perception of MCE was not as favorable. There tended to be a more conservative outlook, and there were some residents who were interested in opposing it very vocally. Does that answer your question? To your satisfaction? Yes, okay, great. So moving on to the deep green, we have just under 1,400 deep green enrollments in the 9 new communities.
Jamie, sorry to interrupt again.
No problem. Let's hear it.
Was there a question?
Go back one slide. There we
One
go.
more?
No, that's it.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you, so what is it?
We did not hear your discussion of.
I skipped over this slide, sorry about that. You wanting to hear about the Deep Green Champions? Yes, okay. We had lots of Deep Green customers, and this was just a handful of recent entities that wanted to show off the fact that they were Deep Green, so they are champions. They'll be promoted on our website and our e-newsletter and social media. We have the Bounce Farm in Martinez, which is a trampoline like activity center. The city of Walnut Creek and the city of San Ramon recently opted up their accounts to Deep Green, so yay and thank you. There is a church or a house of worship in Pinole, Ferrari Orthodontics, the Kensington firefighters who were featured on our 3rd and 4th enrollment notices, and also La Miranda Montessori. So that is just a small sampling of the 1,300 or almost 1,400 customers who signed up for Deep Green. And we see that Deep Green in the new communities is at 0.64% overall, but some of the communities are almost at 1% already, Danville and Moraga. So the adoption for Deep Green in the beginning tends to be a little bit slower, but then we see that increase significantly over time, especially as we have community-based campaigns. These are the Deep Green participation rates for our existing communities, and we've got 7,239 Deep Green accounts in those communities, and again, this is listed by percentage. And then the last slide here is showing Deep Green opt-ups, both new and existing. So we've got 8,627 Deep Green opt-ups, which is pretty awesome. I remember way back when we were striving to get 1,000 across our service area. So it's great to see this, and we'll have plans underway in the coming months to, what was that? Yeah, 10,000 is definitely next. So we'll be developing plans to increase Deep Green in the 9 new communities as well as throughout the existing service area. This is the last slide, and it shows the Deep Green opt-ups by phase. And again, you can see that there is a correlation between the service start and the percentage of Deep Green customers, but also certainly by location as well. Some of the communities have taken on some great initiatives to really increase Deep Green enrollments, Fairfax being one of them, and they've been really successful. Any questions?
Looks great, Jamie. Thanks for all these statistics.
Yeah, I have actually one more announcement, if you don't mind. Some of you probably know that I started working with Dawn at the County of Marin in December of 2007. And a year after that, we formed our agency. And 2 years after that, we launched. And many years after that, we come here to today. It's been really amazing being a part of this organization. I'm super proud of all of the accomplishments that we have achieved. I think we see things really differently, challenging the status quo, and I know that we've been instrumental in the climate change movement here in California. So it's with a mix of emotions, bittersweet, I'm excited and sad, also full of gratitude. But I wanted to let you guys know that I am wrapping up my time here at the end of the month. And I'm going to be starting my next adventure, which is going to be abroad, just traveling around for the next year and hopefully on my way to becoming fluent in Spanish. So I wanted to thank you all so much for everything since I've been here. I feel assured and confident leaving because we have an amazing team led by Dawn, our staff, you as the directors, and we've had some excellent applicants who are extremely well qualified that we've already been interviewing to fulfill my role. So I just wanted to let you guys all know. I still have a couple of more weeks, but it's been amazing working with you, and thank you so much.
Well, Jamie, we can't thank you enough, and for those of us who've been on this board for a while, the trajectory of the increasing sophistication and capability of the communications department has just been fantastic, and it's really been because of your leadership. So it's hard to imagine an MCE without you here giving us these reports, but we'll try to do well in your absence, and and wait for you to come back fluent in Spanish.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, so Dawn, am I correct?
Okay, excuse me. Hello? Hello, Scott Perkins, San Ramon. Could you make that view graph slide deck available, send it out to board members? I didn't see it in their package.
Thank you.
Yeah, great idea to circulate. that.
What
That-
table?
Right in front of you.
Right in front of me. I didn't get one, okay? So,
Send it out again, it's a good one.
no? No?
All right. So I think, Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, item 12, we're not going to have a presentation, but we do have good information on our regulatory and legislative items in our packet, which hopefully everybody got if they want to take a look at that. Which brings us to board and staff matters, if there are any.
I have 2 items, but if there are any board members that would like to go first?
Nope, we're good here.
Okay, great. I just wanted to, first of all, I wanted to announce the exciting news that Walnut Creek has made the decision as of last Tuesday to enroll all of their city operations, all of their city accounts in deep green. So congratulations to Walnut Creek. It's really great to see that leadership. I also wanted to let folks know that in your board packet, under the CEO report item, there is a summary of our energy efficiency program metrics to date. We have a quarterly update that is always included in your packet. So if folks have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me directly. And then the last point, I just wanted to let folks know that on the dais today for you, we have a copy of a letter that CalCCA sent into the legislature about some activity that's happening at the CPUC. And feel free to look at that at your leisure. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. That's all that I have.
Great. Thank you, Dawn. And thank you, everyone. I know this has been a very long meeting for folks tonight, and I really appreciate your hanging in and coming early and staying late. And probably we won't see each other until July. Take care. Yeah, I promise. I know. All right, we're adjourned.